Welcome back to our studios in Lahore. I'm Hamza Amjad, and let's begin the bulletin with Iran. It's warned all foreign forces to leave the Middle East. Foreign Ministry spokesman Abbas Mousavi said regional states are capable of maintaining security. Iran said it will retaliate if Britain does not release its oil tanker. The Royal Marines seized the tanker last week on suspicion of breaking European sanctions by taking oil to Syria. Mousavi accused the UK of taking action under US pressure. London has claimed that Iranian forces impeded a British tanker near the Strait of Hormuz. Move on to the US, where the Pentagon says it plans to provide naval escorts to the vessels in the Gulf. This comes a day after the UK accused Iran of impeding a British oil tanker near the Strait of Hormuz. Joint Chiefs of Staff nominee General Mark Milley said the US is working to build a naval coalition to protect commercial shipping near Iran. In a testimony to the US Congress, he said the coalition would be finalized over the next couple of weeks. Milley said freedom of navigation is fundamental and should be respected by Iran. Now, meanwhile, news reports say that the US has delayed the imposition of sanctions on Iran's Foreign Minister Javad Zarif. This has raised hopes of diplomatic engagement. 5 people were killed in a suicide bombing in Afghanistan's eastern Nangarhar province. Officials said 40 others were wounded as a teenager targeted pro-government commander at a wedding party. No group has yet claimed responsibility for the attack. Human Rights Watch have called for Afghan commandos to be prosecuted after they killed 4 civilians during a raid on a medical center in central Afghanistan. In a statement, it said deliberate attacks on medical facilities and the killing of civilians are war crimes. Neither the Afghan Defense Ministry nor US forces in Afghanistan immediately commented. It was not clear whether the US military had supported Afghan troops in the July 8th raid. In Sudan, the ruling military says it has thwarted another coup attempt launched to scuttle a recent power-sharing agreement with the civilian opposition. Now, state media said 16 serving and retired military officers have been arrested. Security Chief Jamal Umar Ibrahim said others suspected of involvement in the failed takeover are under investigation. This is the second coup attempted by military officers in the last 30 days, highlighting divisions within the armed forces. It comes amid negotiations between the ruling government and protest leaders over the implementation of a power-sharing deal. The military and a pro-democracy coalition agreed on a joint sovereign council last week with a rotating leadership. This will rule Sudan for 3 years before elections are held. 39 more fighters have been killed in ongoing clashes between Syrian government forces and militants in the northwestern Hama province. Over 120 have been killed in the past 48 hours. Monitors say government forces have regained land from militants in an advance on the village of Hamamiyat. Former al-Qaeda militants seized control of the village and a hilltop earlier this week. Monitors say fighting is ongoing across northwest Syria as regime planes and artillery pound the region. And in the US-China trade war, China says it will slap sanctions on US firms involved in a potential arms sale worth over $2 billion to Taiwan. Now, a foreign ministry spokesman says the arms sale violated the norms of international law. Earlier, Beijing's top diplomat Wang Yi warned the United States against a planned arms sale to Taiwan. Yi says no foreign force can stop the reunification of China and they should not try to intervene. Well, US negotiators have met officials in New Delhi for trade talks amid strained ties over retaliatory tariffs. Now, the US delegation is being led by Assistant Trade Representative for South and Central Asia, Christopher Wilson. Now, in addition to delegation-level talks, Wilson will meet India's Commerce Minister, Piyush Goyal. The US is also expected to press India to devise stricter rules for e-commerce. President Donald Trump this week reiterated his criticism of India's tariffs, calling them unacceptable. Now, for more on this, we're joined by Rebecca Bulletin from Mumbai, and she's an Indus News correspondent. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for joining Indus News and speaking to us. Well, first of all, we know that President Trump and Prime Minister Modi met on the sidelines of the G20 summit and talked about these retaliatory tariffs imposed from either side. What's the current status of the trade conflict between them?
Yes, there was that meeting at the G20, and out of that it did emerge that the two sides did seem to want to sort out these very thorny trade issues that have been going on for some time. It's been quite a drawn-out trade dispute between the US and India over a number of issues. And now today there is that meeting taking place between US and Indian trade negotiators, also with the Commerce Ministry, Piyush Goyal as well. So we're seeing some sort of progress there, at least in terms of talks taking place, which it was revealed that something like this would happen. That emerged from that G20 meeting between Modi and Trump. However, we have to wait and see, has there been any kind of compromise between the two sides, because both Modi and Trump do seem very set on taking quite protectionist measures when it comes to trade. And we have really seen this trade dispute escalate between India and the US over the past few weeks, with the US ending India's preferential trade status. That means for a lot of people, a lot of companies exporting goods from India to the US, including some textile products, auto components, they've been slapped with these higher duties, whereas before they were enjoying sort of duty-free status for certain products. And then we saw India reacting to that. It introduced its own retaliatory tariffs on goods, including almonds and apples and a number of other products as well. And then there's a lot of background to this as well. There have been a lot of issues, including India introducing e-commerce regulations that have impacted Amazon and Walmart, which have invested very, very heavily in the e-commerce sector in India. And they've had to basically change the way that they're doing business here because of these rules that were really quite suddenly introduced earlier this year. The US also
Rebecca, you mentioned Trump and Modi are still adamant on these protectionist measures in applying these tariffs. What do you think will be the outcome of these talks? Are they expected to reach an agreement?
I think that's the question that everybody's asking, and we'll have to wait to see what happens, because it's interesting. We're seeing these talks taking place, but just ahead of these talks, we saw Trump taking to Twitter to say that tariffs were unacceptable. So there's not going to be an easy solution. I don't think analysts are saying there's not really a sort of an easy way out of this, although they do say that the two sides do want to reach some kind of agreement, given what's at stake. India and the US are both quite heavily dependent on each other when it comes to trade. India, in particular, has a trade surplus with the US. I mean, that's really what Trump is very, very concerned about, that he feels there's an unequal relationship when it comes to trade between India and the US. But at the same time, we do have US companies that are investing heavily in India. The United States is also very focused on India as a consumer market. You've got a population of 1.3 billion people here. India, at the same time, is also trying to attract a lot more foreign direct investment, and its economy has been slowing down. It's slowed to a 5-year low of 6.8% in the last financial year. So India definitely is thinking about things like growth as well. So there are all those signs that suggest that the two sides really don't want this dispute to escalate. But then again, when we see the messages coming through from Trump and the action being taken by India in terms of retaliatory tariffs, clearly it's not going to be an easy solution that comes through.
Right. Well, it makes sense that you state that there's an unequal relationship, according to President Trump. And, of course, companies do want to invest and are investing in India, which is such a massive market. But there is still the reality of maybe the talks not working out between President Trump and Prime Minister Modi. What would happen in that scenario then? What would that do for the US and India relations then?
Absolutely. Then in that case, then this dispute is going to continue. This trade dispute will sort of rumble on, and we could see, the two sides taking further steps. So that's really the major concern here, that economists are quite concerned about that and the impact it could ultimately have on the Indian economy. Companies in the US are also concerned as well, because it affects them too. So it's not just India that's actually affected, although Trump talks about America first and buy American, hire American. When there are sort of disputes between countries, it is also American companies as well that do get affected. India sends a lot of IT workers to the US, for example. A lot of companies in Silicon Valley are heavily dependent on workers from India. And there's been a lot of talk about the H-1B visas, which a lot of skilled workers from India use to go over to the US. And if the US were then to move towards clamping down on those, which is something it has talked about and mentioned broadly as a policy, not just directed at India, of course, but at other countries as well, that's something that would impact a lot of companies both in the US and India. So, but just looking at what's taken place, it's very, very hard to see how they will come out with a solution in one day. We'll have to wait to see what's actually happened, what's actually emerged from these talks. But when we do see the official statements, for example, from the G20, very much the US and India are saying that they do want to work towards some kind of agreement and working out these issues. It's not really in either of their interests for this trade dispute to continue. Nobody is really actually gaining from it ultimately, if you look at the situation in terms of economics and how it actually affects businesses.
Right, well, thank you so much, London. She was joining us there from Mumbai. And of course, she did say that it is not in anyone's interest, of course, for the trade talks to fail per se. So let's see what happens there. We'll keep a close eye on it, so stay tuned to Indus News for that. For now, let's move on. Turkey has said it has taken delivery of the first batch of parts for a Russian air defense system that strained ties with its NATO partners. Now, the Defense Ministry says components for the S-400 systems will continue to arrive over the coming months. Turkey placed its order for the advanced Russian systems in April 2017. Urging Turkey to instead buy its similar Patriot system, the US has threatened to expel it from the F-35 warplanes program. Washington argues that the S-400 is incompatible with NATO's defense network and could compromise the F-35. Now, Turkey has emphasized the S-400 will not be integrated into NATO systems and is not a threat to the alliance. Ankara has called for a joint commission to determine the facts, but the US has not yet responded. Russia's President Vladimir Putin and his Ukrainian counterpart Volodymyr Zelensky have spoken, breaking a 5-year diplomatic silence. In talks held over the phone, the two leaders agreed to continue high-level discussions. Now, the Kremlin says Putin and Zelensky discussed the conflict in eastern Ukraine and an exchange of prisoners. They agreed to continue bilateral dialogue at the expert level. Moscow says the possibility of continuing diplomatic contacts through the Normandy format was also considered. This comes after Zelensky called for Western-mediated talks with Russia. Now, the conflict started, of course, after Russia annexed Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula in 2014. Russia has threatened the UK with retaliatory measures following a ban on its journalists. UK's Foreign Office barred Russia's RT and Sputnik from a media freedom conference in London this week. Russia's Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova said British media organizations working in Russia should prepare to bear the consequences. Zakharova said London's actions were a propaganda attack on the Russian media. She said the UK declined to explain its refusal to allow RT and Sputnik on the conference on the media freedom. London said the Russian news organizations were barred for spreading disinformation. Britain also declined to grant a visa to the Russian diplomats it had previously invited to attend the meeting. Now, staying in the UK, PM candidates Boris Johnson and Jeremy Hunt have promised to stand up for UK's diplomats around the world. Now, this follows the resignation of Britain's ambassador to the US, Kim Darroch, over leaked memos which attracted criticism from President Donald Trump. Foreign Secretary Hunt says he has written to all British diplomats, promising always to back them to the hilt. Johnson, the favourite to succeed Prime Minister Theresa May, flip-flopped, pledging to stand by UK's ambassadors after refusing to back Darroch earlier.
The UK will stand up for the UK interest. The UK will stand up for, and I will stand up for our fantastic diplomats across the world. I just don't think that their careers should be used as political footballs.
Boris Johnson came under fierce criticism from both sides in Parliament for earlier declining to support Darroch. Moving on, Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel has asked her Social Democrat coalition partners not to thwart Ursula von der Leyen's bid to lead the European Commission. She criticised the SPD for failing to back the German defence minister's candidature for the EU's top job. Merkel said the opposition to von der Leyen has created a domestic political crisis which has impeded governance in Germany. MEPs have alleged the German minister's nomination was forced on them. Earlier, incumbent EU Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker said von der Leyen's nomination was not transparent. The European Parliament will vote on her nomination next Tuesday. Well, Ghana's President Nana Akufo-Addo says Africa's relationship with Europe needs to be reset. On a visit to Paris, Akufo-Addo called for Africa to become more self-reliant. French President Emmanuel Macron and the Ghanaian president also met members of the African diaspora in Paris. Akufo-Addo said the disconnect between Africa's true potential and its present status is holding the continent back.
We have to do it ourselves. It cannot be right that the continent that has allegedly the wealthiest resources of all the continents of the world is also the home of the poorest people on the globe. That disconnect is not a good disconnect, and we need to work to change that disconnect.
The Commonwealth Secretary-General Patricia Scotland has said Pakistan's role in peace building is unprecedented. Now, meeting Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi in London, Scotland lauded Islamabad's role in regional stability. The Secretary-General said the Commonwealth is committed to promote peace around the globe. Well, a gym in California is using calories burned by its clients to power up the facility. The gym owner says one of his spin classes can generate anywhere between 1,000 to 2,500 watts of electricity. More in this report.
These exercise bikes may look like regular gym equipment, but there is one important difference. They have dedicated inverters similar to those found on solar panels or wind turbines. This means the bikes can turn watts generated during a workout into electricity.
So it just really depends on the individual and how fast they're going. But on average, you'll at least produce 20 watts, with a 20-minute workout. So 1 watt per minute if you're just going the basic resistance. But if you want to kick it up a notch, you can honestly make anywhere close to 50 watts in those 20 minutes.
Sacramento ECO Fitness also has similar non-motorized treadmills. Many members say they joined the gym to use the eco-cardio machines.
Combining fitness and something that's, of course, really good for you and the environment is just probably one of the best ideas that anybody could ever come up with.
The gym owner says this is only the beginning. He says he wants all the gyms to follow his model, using excess energy to power city blocks. But for now, the energy produced during one of his spin classes is only enough to power a fridge.
Well, that last report definitely reminded me to get to the gym, but let's move on to business for now. Washington has accused China of backsliding on promises to increase American farm imports. President Donald Trump says Beijing is letting the US down by not importing agricultural products. He hopes China will start buying farm goods soon. The statement comes after US and Chinese trade officials had their first contact to revive negotiations that nearly collapsed in May. Since last year, the two countries have traded tariffs of more than $360 billion in two-way trade. US President Donald Trump has told Facebook to obtain a banking license before launching its cryptocurrency, Libra. Trump said any company wanting to operate like a bank must be subject to all banking regulations. The US president said digital currencies are not money and can enable criminal activities such as drug trafficking. Trump said he is not a fan of Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies because of their extreme volatility. US Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell and Bank of England Governor Mark Carney have also opposed Facebook's planned digital currency. Carney said Facebook must show Libra is rock solid before receiving permission to launch the cryptocurrency. Well, let's take a look at the weather around the world. Well, that was all I have from the news bulletin at the moment, but don't go anywhere. I'll be back in a couple of hours with your news headlines. Stay tuned to Indus News, and as always, thanks for watching.